Has a beautiful tone, doesn't it? You know, most of you know, because a lot of you not only have studied the teachings from Paramahansa Yogananda for quite some time, but many of you teach. But I would like to ask, how many people are new to the teachings of Ananda? Okay, good. Very good. So we'll share a lot of the teachings that have come down to us from Babaji and this great lineage through Yogananda, through Swami Kriyananda, and then to all of us. And there are many, many resources, but one of the very greatest is the essence of the Bhagavad Gita that explains a lot of the subtleties in the Bhagavad Gita. But Swami Kriyananda wrote a book called Demystifying Patanjali. And that book, Essence of the Bhagavad Gita, also demystifies the Bhagavad Gita. And so at the beginning of the Gita, many of you are familiar that Arjuna came out between the two armies, and the two armies began to blow, the Pandavas began to blow their conches. And one by one they blew those. Master explains that the conches represent the sounds, the inner sounds of the chakras that are awakened in meditation. And then the Kauravas had to respond because it was frightening for them to hear those conches. And so they responded by banging on cymbals and drums and making a lot of noise. Master explained that represents the ego using the body and the senses to make a lot of noise in meditation to stop the devotee from going inward. And so this long battle goes back all the way to the creation of mankind. The tendency of the soul to want to draw us inward and upward in an expansive way, and the tendency of the ego to want to contract and draw us back down into the body, and more importantly than just into the body, into the separation that comes from the senses and from body consciousness and ego consciousness. And so this great force, the very nature of creation is always vibrational. Master said that God creates, well, it isn't only Master. He's taking the essence of the great teachings of the Vedas and bringing them into the modern world so that we can understand them. But the essence of creation is always a vibration. Swami Kriyananda used to use the illustration of a tuning fork. And if you just hold I think you know what that is. It's a little kind of prong that if you're going to tune a guitar, you tap that and it makes a sound of a particular note. But if you hold that tuning fork that has two tines, and those tines aren't moving, there's no sound. And so you have to tap that and begin that movement back and forth. And that creates, for our physical senses, it creates a movement of air that we hear as sound. But that's the way that the creation of the universe is done, is through vibration. And that vibration is captured in the sound of Om. But it's also captured in all of the dualities that bring up, that exist. It is captured in light and dark, up and down, expansion and contraction, love and hate, joy and sorrow. All of those dualities are the way that creation is kept into manifestation. And it's only through that vibration that we can have an outer universe. Now, the yogis are trying to a certain extent to withdraw from that outer universe. Not to withdraw from existence, because this universe is the lowest of all the universes. I mean, there are lower physical planes than what we inhabit. In fact, Master said that we inhabit a very rajasic means active, maybe energetic or nervous. We inhabit a nervous planet in a nervous galaxy, in a nervous universe. And that's why we find it hard to meditate, hard to get our minds still, and because our minds are constantly drawn in an outward direction. So what Devi and I are going to talk about is a series of 3 classes that, do you want to explain? Devi's going to explain this series of 3 classes that will help us progressively go deeper into these subjects.
So rather than thinking of our 3 discourses as separate units, try to see them, and this is how we'll present them, as a building continuum for your deeper understanding. So this evening, we'll be talking about how to live with integrity in your life, business, career, family. That's sort of the foundation, right action. Tomorrow morning, we'll be talking about how to find happiness and success through inner transformation. So once we have been able to achieve the finding Dharma and right action in our life, then we are able to begin the process of understanding that happiness and success are found within. And then finally, Sunday morning, we'll be talking about changing your karma. So once we have mastered the outer behavior and begin to live with inner values, then we can actually begin to change the trajectory of our development, of our evolution. So these will be the 3 parts that we'll talk about during this wonderful time together. And Jyotish will begin, but I just want to take a moment to say how absolutely delightful it is to see so many friends from all over India. We so much appreciate you coming, and it is just a joy. It's like a big family reunion. So thank you all for coming.
Yes, for you, this may be a retreat or an opportunity to listen. For us, it's like a big party. All of our friends have come, and we're going to talk together and eat together and play together. So it's going to be a really nice weekend, but also an uplifting weekend. So tonight, as Devi said, we're going to talk about how to bring spiritual consciousness or spiritual integrity into our daily life, into our business, into our work, into our families, into our relationships, all of that. You know, spiritual teachings, when they're given, they always follow a pattern. It's just struck me lately, I was thinking about this. But they always start from the outside and then progressively work in a more inward direction. Why? Because our minds are outside. Our minds are exteriorized. And if we started spiritual teachings by saying, well, Devi laughed at this example, but if we started spiritual instruction by how you properly come back to your body from the state of samadhi, it would be a little disconnect there with beginners or with experienced yogis too. So what do we start with? We start with how to sit, how to breathe, what the posture should be, perhaps what your altar should be, and so on. So tonight we're going to talk about the more outward aspects, and then progressively we'll draw more and more inward to show where the root causes and the root solutions of the problems are. And so let's start by how do we bring spiritual integrity into our daily life, into business, into relationships, and so on. So what in the world does spiritual integrity mean? What does spiritual mean? I mean, you could define that in a lot of different ways. But rather than have esoteric definitions or something that quotes the scriptures. I want to give a very simple explanation of what's spiritual. Spiritual is when we expand to include others. And non-spiritual is when we contract to exclude and we get into the thought that only we exist and only we are important. Ultimately, our ultimate expansion is in deeper and deeper states of meditation. We discover the state of self-realization where we realize that we are everything that exists. And we're God beyond this physical plane, this vibration of manifestation. So we're everything. So that very, very expansive state, I will call innately spiritual. And you don't have to think that it's this path or that path, this religion or that religion. All religions try to help us expand in some way. And all, one might say, followers of religions who become misguided want us to contract into only their way is right, only my way is right, whatever you're doing is wrong, and so on. So that battle, that dualistic battle between expansion and contraction exists in everything. Now, to give you a visual image, I like visual images. They stick in my mind better than just words. To give you a visual image, think of your energy being like a funnel. A funnel has a big wide rim and then it comes down to almost a point. So your energy, when it's contracted, is down at that narrow point of the funnel. When it's and how much, let's say, how much liquid can that narrow point hold? Hardly any. But at the top, that funnel can be very large and it can hold a great deal. We aren't here talking about liquid, we're talking about consciousness. How much consciousness do you have when you're expanded? You have enormous consciousness. How much consciousness and awareness do you have when you're down at that narrow end of the funnel? You have only a little bit. And so, for the purpose of this talk, let's talk about spiritual as being the expanded state of consciousness and non-spiritual as being the contracted state of consciousness. Now, it isn't just one big funnel. We have lots and lots of funnels. Every one of the chakras has its own funnel. You can have expanded energy in a chakra, or you can have contracted energy. And each of the chakras are like that. Each moment has that possibility of expansion and contraction. This talk right now has expansion and contraction possibilities. Some of you could be listening with just part of your mind, thinking, well, I wonder how long this fellow is going to continue to drone on up there, and I suppose I have to sit quietly, but let me do a little text message here while I'm, and so that contracts, and others are thinking, oh, this is inspiring me to change and expand and try to find God. And so that sense of contraction and expansion, I'm going to bring in periodically throughout the 3 classes. But let's now come back to the thought of how do we bring spiritual integrity. So how do we bring expanded consciousness, since that's the way I defined spirituality, into daily life? How do we bring it into work? One of the worst mistakes we can make is to draw a dividing line or a gap between our spiritual search and daily life. Because if we separate those two, thinking that, oh yes, I meditate and I try to find God and I try to read some uplifting passages from the scriptures, But when I go to work, I need to be hard-headed. I need to get discipline going. I need to show people who's boss. And so we're contracted and then, expanded and then we contract. Well, if we divide our daily life from our spiritual life, how in the world are we ever going to be integrated human beings? We've got to bring these two together. So how do we bring expansion into our daily life? Well, the two strongest tools that I want to talk about are our behaviors and our attitudes. So what are behaviors that are expanded or spiritual? Well, probably for all of us who are steeped a little bit either in the teachings of India or at the culture of India, it's Patanjali defined the proper behaviors. So even Patanjali in his Eightfold Path starts outward with the behavior that we should have, and then the energy, and then increasingly inside and deep. So, but he starts by the proper behaviors. And he talks about 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. The yamas are non-violence, non-lying, non-stealing, non-sensuality, and non-greed. And let's just talk about those for a minute in how they relate to our daily life. So non-violence. Well, probably most of us here are not of a particularly violent nature. I look at some of these monks and they don't look quite frightening to me, as if it would be dangerous to meet them on a dark street at night, you know. Most of us have a kind of a kindly heart and a nature where we don't engage in physical violence. If you do engage in physical violence, I have 2 words. Stop it. It hurts you and it hurts others. So you just have to, there are certain behaviors. That's what yama and niyama means. Yama means control. It means there are certain behaviors that if we're going to expand our consciousness, we have to control these behaviors, because if we don't, then it contracts our consciousness. So nonviolence. But most of us, as I say, aren't engaged in any kind of physical violence. But what about subtler forms? A couple of years ago, we visited a beautiful lotus temple of Swami Satchidananda. We visited with one of his cousins, and who knew a lot of the family history, told us a wonderful story about Swami Satchidananda when he was only about 11 or 12 years old. His father was quite a stern man, and he would berate the servants and he would chastise people. And one day, when he was about 12 years old, the father was chastising his son, who was going to become Satchidananda. Wasn't yet a Swami, of course. And when his father finished, Satchidananda picked up a beautiful vase that was on the table, and he threw it on the floor and shattered it. And his father just was about to go into a rage, and Satchidananda said, "Father, can you put that vase back to all the pieces back together again?" Now, this didn't shatter, but you've got the image. And the father said, "Well, no, of course not." And he said, "Well, you can't put the minds of me and the servants back together either. Why do you go around shattering them like that all the time?" And the father, when he heard that, realized what his behavior was doing to people. And he really, that was a lesson. Of course, Satchidananda had real power, spiritual power, but it changed his father. But what about not physical violence, but what about verbal violence? What about action that creates violence? What about negative thinking? What about the kinds of activities that we engage in that diminish another person, do violence to another person? So, if we're going to take our spiritual integrity expansion into our daily life, if we're going to apply that to violence, then we have to think about what the ramifications of our actions are on the other person. We have to, because ultimately, and all spiritual teachings, all religions teach this, ultimately we have to treat other people the way we expect to be treated ourselves. I once saw in the Christian Bible, the way it's stated is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But I once saw a statement, someone gave us a bookmark of that statement as it was given in all different, there were 15 different religions, all of which had that seed thought that we must treat others the way that we expect them to treat us. Now, that's spiritual integrity brought into business. So when you're relating to other people, you need to relate to them as if they are extensions of your own self. Now, everybody sitting here probably will nod and say, yes, I should do that. That's a very good teaching. Yes, I agree with that. But do you do it? And how can we stop the behavior that keeps us from doing that? Well, that's part of the spiritual path. Because what we do, what we practice, we will increase. So if you practice criticizing other people, that tendency, brain circuits are involved in all of that, that tendency is going to increase in you. And so one way to not be violent with others is not to criticize people. Just try to support them. Would you prefer to be criticized or supported? How many would prefer to be criticized? Please raise your hand. Yeah, I thought so. So, exactly. So, I don't need to keep repeating the point because you understand that to do that which you feel that you want to have done to you. But how do you do that? How do you change your habit patterns? One is that, and we'll talk more about this in succeeding classes, but you have to build the bridge between your ideals and your behavior. And so that bridge you have to build a step at a time. And so at first you just need to work on creating some habit patterns that are more compassionate, more expansive. To a certain extent, it means the very way that you hold your body. There's a compassionate posture and a non-compassionate posture. So if I were talking like this, you need to be compassionate. You need to help other people. My body language is saying the opposite. My tone of my voice is saying the opposite. And so everything works together. So you need to integrate your ideals into your behavior patterns. Now I'll touch on 2 or 3 of the others because most of us don't have that much of a difficulty, let's say at work, with violence. Some do. We've heard over and over and over again when we ask for questions. The first question often that comes up is, I've got this terrible boss at work who just treats me horribly. How do I deal with that? And so we try to answer that. Well, we're going to go into how to change your karma in the last part of the 3 discussions. So we'll save that for then. But most of us don't have the problem at work or in our life of actual violence, but many, many, many people have a problem in the way that people, or perhaps you, are dealing with some of the other ones of Patanjali's. Non-stealing, non-greed, non-lying. Do any of those sound like they might happen in your job place? It's pretty common that all 3 of those happen. It's pretty common that all 3 of them, unfortunately, happen among our political leaders. And the world, as we find it right now, is rife with those problems. So those problems, again, come. Always the root cause of the problems that we face is the contractive nature. Why would someone steal? Because they think my welfare is more important than the welfare of others. And even a little bit of that is dangerous. One time early on, I started working with Swami Kriyananda more than 50 years ago. And there was one time, it was the first time he really chastised me. And he did it gently, but he had gone and on a vacation, and in that vacation he had purchased some almonds, flavored almonds. Now they're very common. In those days, I had never tasted one. And he had a package open on the table. And so when I was growing up, if there was food on the table, it was common just to take it. So that was not common with Swami Kriyananda. So I went, every time I passed the table, I took an almond or 2, and the number decreased and decreased. And he didn't say anything for a while. He let it go. But I did it too often. And he said, I bought those almonds, and if you would like some, please ask me, and I will give them to you. But if you don't ask me, and you simply take them, then that's stealing. And I never took another almond from him after that. But even, it was only a little thing. But he caught that in order to stop me from that tendency. So if you take anything from anyone, maybe you can't stop that behavior, but at least know that that's contractive and it will lead to your unhappiness and to the unhappiness of others. Non-lying. I was with Ananda Ma, and I asked her a question. She gave me a most peculiar answer. I said, Ma, how can I develop more devotion, more divine love? She said, never tell a lie. Now, maybe she said that, maybe she was reading something particular in my karma, or maybe it was a broader teaching. I'm not even sure. But she said that was a peculiar response to that question. But gradually, over the years, I have more and more tried not to ever tell a lie. To the point, Swami Kriyananda, if he said, I'm going to go to town and get a newspaper, in Italy where he lived, it was about a half-hour drive to go in and to the town of Assisi and where they had newspapers. And if he said, I'm going to go to town and get a newspaper, I saw this where someone had been in town and brought him a newspaper. So there was no need for him to go to town and get a newspaper. Still, he got in the car and with a driver and went to town to get a newspaper, simply because he said, I will. So as you progress, see, the behavior helps us expand, but also if we observe people with expanded consciousness, they don't need to be told. Swami Kriyananda didn't need to be told, oh, well, Swami Kriyananda, Patanjali says non-lying is one of the yamas. He didn't. A person of expanded consciousness never needs to hear of Patanjali and never needs to hear of these principles. He simply behaves this way. A person of expanded consciousness has complete integrity between what he says and what he does. And so non-lying is just an expression. So Patanjali is saying, start with controlling your behaviors. Try to make your behaviors modeled on a person of expanded consciousness, someone who does not do violence. Gandhi changed the whole fate of not only India, but much of the rest of the world, because he held absolutely, powerfully to the spiritual principle of nonviolence. If this world could hold to that one thing, what a change would happen. But we can't expect others to do the changing for us. We have to do the changing ourselves. So these qualities, these behaviors of nonviolence, non-lying, non-stealing, non-sensuality, and non-greed, we need to put them into practice in our daily life. And if we do, we will find our consciousness is expansive or expanding. And the result of expanded consciousness is that we're more joyful, we're happier, we're more uplifted, the day goes better. Everything goes better as we expand. Everything goes worse as we contract. And so we could go on talking about these principles, but we'll talk more tomorrow, and we'll have a chance for questions and answers. And we will talk more again on Sunday. But tonight I wanted to especially get in our consciousness the critical nature of using every opportunity as a test of expansion or contraction. And if you will do that, at the end of each day, Swami and Master said to review the day and see what you did. If you'll review the day using that as the measuring stick, in that situation, was I expansive or contractive? In this situation, what did I do? If you use that as a measuring stick, at least you will be able to have, like the needle on a compass, you will have something that points the direction to proper behavior.
So I'll share some thoughts as well with you on this subject. As Jyotish said, we have a wonderful tool given to us by Yoganandaji now, his commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, compiled by Swamiji in a book called The Essence of the Gita. And his interpretation is unlike any other that exists that I'm aware of. And he starts off by saying that this battle of Kurukshetra, the battle of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, yes, it happened historically, but and there was actually a battle that took place. But much more pertinent and important to us is that this is an inner battle that every single soul must confront. And this is why the Gita has the spiritual power for decades, millennium, that draws us and uplifts us. And so this inner battle of the soul between this expansion that Jyotish has been talking about, this movement towards Dharma. In fact, one could say on a certain level that the whole of the Bhagavad Gita is an exhortation to live your duty, to live right action, to do dharma. And there are, of course, many sub-themes, but that theme runs through all of the Gita. Arjuna is asking Krishna, do I have to fight? Well, what is the battle that he is resisting? What is the battle that all of us resist? It's the soul against the ego. It's the forces of spirituality against the forces of materialism. And in a sense, this is the only thing that's going on in each of our lives forever throughout history. The battle between the pull of the soul towards the light and the battle between the darkness trying to say, oh, sink back into that which is comfortable, that which is facile, that which is, Master called it he was talking about people, the familiarity of family, that soft, comfortable state where we just think, oh, I can rest here. I don't need to face the challenge. And lifetimes can go by. And little by little, someone asked us recently, how do we know there's free will? And he was a very intellectual young man. And I didn't know how to answer him at first, but I said, we know there is free will because there is suffering. It is because we use our free will not in alignment with divine will, not in alignment with higher principles, with Dharma, that we suffer. And this is the indication that I have erred. If we had no free will, if God was just, we were little puppets and he was just pulling the strings, there would be no suffering. But he gave us free will through the vehicle of suffering, to realize I must fight this battle if I am ever going to find happiness. And so this inner battle of light and darkness, the inner battle of Dharma and Adharma. And we see this very much in the world today. Because what we see, interestingly enough, the Gita was given to us. Those of you who know, if you're newer at the path, these teachings, this will be unfamiliar. But there are these great cycles of time that Swami Sri Yukteswar talked about, the yugas of rising civilizations and falling civilizations. And the Gita was given to us at the same point in descending Dwapara Yuga as we are now in ascending. So the Gita was given in a time of similar confusion about Dharma and Adharma. And it was given to us to help bring clarity. I love the very last shlokas of the Gita where Krishna says to Arjuna, and now have you understood, and now you act accordingly. So beautiful. And so in this battle of Dharma and Adharma, the reason it's complex is because people want to say, oh, it's all relative. It's all relative. That's one of the curses of our times, the theory of relativity, where there is no absolute. That's not what Einstein said. There is the absolute. And what is it? Even in the world of physics, light, the speed of light. And so it is on the spiritual realm. The absolute is the presence of God's light within us that doesn't change, that isn't. It will be convenient to be dharmic in this situation, but it won't be convenient to be dharmic in that. We need to align ourselves, whether it's convenient or not. And the challenge is that even though it is absolute, Dharma, the beautiful term Sanatan Dharma, the eternal religion, Dharma is eternal. It doesn't change with time and culture and circumstance. Swamiji said, I love this expression. It took me a long time to appreciate it. He said, even if all life in the universe would be obliterated, Sanatan Dharma would still exist because it does not depend on human existence and consciousness. I love that. It's so reassuring to know the eternal nature of Dharma. But at the same time, even in one lifetime, and this is where it's tricky, that Dharma may change. in the essence, it doesn't change, but the form may change. And what I'm speaking of here are the different stages of life, the different ashrams. So we start off with the brahmachari, the student, celibate student, who's focusing his energy on, in an ideal society, on drawing wisdom from higher teachers, from mentors, refining, understanding the principles of the universe. And there's a certain dharma for that stage. It is not a stage where you've taken up responsibility yet. That's the next stage, householder stage, where you take on family, where you take on responsibility in business. And there's a very distinct dharma for that, and it's different from the first stage, isn't it? And I was recently reading a really delightful blog by a young man who lives at Ananda Village. It's if you're interested in reading it, it's on ananda.org. He and his wife just had their first child, and the name of the blog is How to Meditate with a Newborn. And they have a little 6-week-old daughter named Mala, beautiful little girl. We've yet to meet her, but we've seen pictures. And he said, my little daughter has a T-shirt, a little pair of pajamas that say, "No one sleeps until I say so." And he said, I'm thinking of getting her another one that says, "I determine how long you'll meditate." And so this is the dharma of that period of life. And you can't have the same freedom. You can't have the ability to, oh no, I'm going to just stop and read the Gita. Your dharma is something else. But what does it have in common? It's what God has determined of the duty of that stage in your life. And you don't choose. You can't say, oh, now I'm a householder and I'm just going to be observant and I'm not going to be involved. Your dharma is to get in there and take care of your children, support your family, whatever it is, but with righteous action. And then you go on to the next stage, the advisor stage, we'll call it, where you're starting to withdraw. And you're not so involved in the world. Your children maybe are grown, and you give them advice. Maybe a friend of ours just retired from a very successful corporate career, and they're still drawing on her as an advisor. And she very wisely said, I will give you advice, but I won't take any money. She said, I know if I take money, they'll try to get me back involved again. So she's just doing it as an advisor, and it's gratifying for her. And then finally, the last stage, sannyas, where you say it's time to walk away. But I bring these things to renounce the world. Traditionally, sannyas, I was told, means forest dweller. So you withdraw from the city life, from the marketplace, and you go off. Well, it's metaphorical in a sense as well. Swami Kriyananda was a sannyas. He did not withdraw. He was out there serving his guru with his last breath in his body. But the reason I bring this up is it isn't so clear. And there's that wonderful statement in the Gita, better to fail at your own dharma than to succeed at someone else's. So you have to look, what is God asking me at this stage in my life? It may be very different from what he's asking someone else. But if you know in your heart, this is what God's asking me, then you have to do it. Whatever the inconvenience, whatever the personal sacrifice, whatever the resistance, because to spiritual growth is really a process of the ego is like an unpolished gem. And with our self-discipline, with our trying to live this life, we're rubbing this rough cut gem of the ego, and we're polishing it and we're polishing it, until finally it becomes transparent, a beautiful diamond that God's light can reflect through. But how do we find integrity? How do we know? Jyotish used these wonderful models from Patanjali, the yamas, niyamas. They're very similar in many ways to the 10 Commandments. And in fact, we read a book written by a man who had studied ancient Hebrew and the ancient history of the Hebrew people at that time. And he said the original 10 Commandments in Aramaic were not, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, so forth. He said, and this man knew nothing of Patanjali. He was a Western scholar. He said the original 10 Commandments were one word, like non-stealing, non-lying. So they all reflect the same truth. But how do we find our own Dharma? Because it may look different for different people. So we can't succeed at someone else's Dharma. We find it by sensitively interiorizing our mind and asking, God, what do you want of me? How can I reflect your consciousness in my life? And I'll share 2 stories that are seemingly contradictory, but in essence they represent the same principle. The first one is of a man, very devoted man, who would pray every day to God, Lord, whenever you call me, I will drop everything and I will come away and live only for you. And every day he would say this prayer. And then as time went by, this man had a wife, and the wife was about to give birth to their first child. But the birth did not go well, and the wife tragically died. And he was holding this new little born child in his hands and filled with so much love and so much compassion, with the thought, I will do everything to protect this new helpless child with no mother. And just then, God spoke to him and said, I collecting your prayer now. It is time to leave everything and follow me. And the man said, Lord, I will do as you ask, because my love for you is supreme. But I have a human heart too. Reassure me that this child will be taken care of. And the Lord said, put the child in a little basket and go out on the road and put it under that tree, and then stand back in the forest and watch. And the man did as he was told. And soon he heard a procession of horses and carriages coming in the distance, and he hid behind the tree and he watched. And it was a royal procession coming through the realm. And the little baby started crying in the basket. And the queen of the realm told her driver, stop. And she got down and she found this little newborn baby in the basket. And she said, oh, what a beautiful child. I will take this child and raise him as my own. And the father knew in his heart that the child would be taken care of. So that's one incidence of giving up what God asks you. But then on the other side, there's another story that tells, taken from a different perspective. And this is the story at the end of the Mahabharata, when the 5 Pandava brothers their life is over now, and they're going up into the Himalayas to merge with God. And one by one, Draupadi first, and then one by one, the brothers leave their body on, I believe the legend is, it's on Mount Panchachuli, beautiful mountain in the Himalayas. And then finally, the last one left is Yudhishthira, the eldest brother of the Pandavas. And with him is his faithful dog. Another, Yudhishthira's other name is Dharmaraj, king of Dharma. We're speaking of that. And so Dharmaraj, Yudhishthira's faithful dog, who is called Yogiraj, he had followed him through all the tests and trials of his life, had protected him. And then the gates of heaven opened up to Yudhishthira and said, you may come, my son, but a dog cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. You must leave your dog behind. And Yudhishthira paused and he said, Lord, that is not my Dharma. My Dharma is one of caring for those who have served me and who have been dependent on me. I will forsake heaven rather than, it brings tears to one's eyes, doesn't it? Rather than forsaking my canine companion. And just then the heavens opened up and rose petals showered down. And in the form of the dog, it wasn't his dog, it was Lord Vishnu, who said this was the final test, Yudhishthira, come. And so here is one instance where the man had to abandon, and that was the Dharma. And then we have the other instance where he said, I will not abandon, and that was the Dharma. So how do we know? Again, it comes to feeling within yourself, what is God asking of me? In both of those cases, it took courage and self-sacrifice and determination. But they did it even though the outward expression was different, and that was the right Dharma. And so, in the last chapter of the Gita, chapter 18, it's as though Krishna is summing up everything he said about Dharma and right action, and he gives us very clear guidelines. It's beautiful. Reread it if you haven't read it recently. It's so beautiful. He goes over and over again. What is sattvic action? What is tamasic action? What is rajasic action? How do we know what Dharma is? But simply put, this is what is said in that magnificent last chapter. He says that we know Dharma because we know we are expressing Dharma in our lives, living with integrity, when there is a sense of we are not doing it for any ulterior motive. We are not doing this action because of likes or dislikes or desires. We are doing this action without attachment to the fruit of our actions. We are offering this action entirely to God. And with it comes a sense of inward peace, inward joy, inward freedom. And there also comes, and this is important, when we are living dharmically, we are aligning ourselves with the power of the universe, and we are given strength to fulfill our dharma. Doesn't mean it's easy, but we are given the strength to fulfill it. On the other hand, and this was interesting to me, dharmic action, it's based on desires, it's based on attachments, it's based on what you are getting out of it. And whereas with dharmic action, there's a sense of calmness and courage and strength. Adharmic action is characterized by rigid determination, by and heedlessness, indifference to how it will affect other people. And so I remember many years ago, Jyotish and I are involved with many different aspects, administrative aspects in the community. And years ago, he gave me some very good advice. He said, any action you take, you need to be sure, look at who it will affect and be in touch with those people to make sure they are comfortable with this action. And so look at how any action, who will this affect? Who will this hurt? Who will this help? And if you feel this is an action, expansion as we were talking, that will bring goodwill, that will bring helpfulness, that will bring unity, integrity to everyone who this action affects, then you know it is a dharmic action. And with dharmic action, why? Why do we want to live with integrity? Because it brings us joy, and it brings us freedom, and it takes us ever closer to God. And that's why Master Yoganandaji said, our life is a balance of meditation and service or dharmic action. One without the other won't get us to spiritual freedom, but both together will bring us success and happiness, and that's what we'll talk about tomorrow.